There are places in the world where silence is not a passive absence of sound, but an active force, a presence that watches, waits, and devours. The St. Augustus Library, nestled in the forgotten corner of a city that had outgrown it, was one such place. Built in 1896, the library had long since lost its battle against time. The once grand double doors bore the scars of 1,000 hesitant hands, and the stone lions flanking its entrance had eroded into grotesque, melted forms. Few visited anymore. Few were still left with the same light in their eyes that they had upon entering. Darren Holloway, a postgraduate student in historical preservation, arrived at St. Augustus on the kind of drizzly afternoon that made everything appear half-submerged in water. He had received an email from an unknown sender the night before, an invitation to examine a recently discovered archive within the library. The message had been brief. The collection is open, but not for long. Midnight finds all who stay. The words had lingered in his mind, a strange melody that hummed beneath his skin, but curiosity had overridden caution. The librarian, if she could be called that, met him at the entrance. She was impossibly tall, with a severe black dress that seemed to absorb the light around her. Her fingers were long, the kind that seemed made for turning fragile pages or breaking delicate bones. She did not smile. Instead, she handed him a brass key. "The archives are in the West Wing," she said, her voice hushed but firm. "You'll be alone, Mr. Holloway. The staff leaves before dark." The West Wing smelled of dust and something older, something wet, like ink that had never dried. The architecture here was different from the rest of the library, older, colder. The walls bore elaborate carvings that twisted as Darren walked past, their meanings slipping just out of grasp. He found the archive room at the end of a narrow corridor, the door heavy and unmarked. The key turned with a reluctance that suggested it had not been used in decades. Inside, the air was thick, dense with the weight of history. Tall wooden shelves loomed, filled with books bound in leather, cloth, and, he hesitated, what looked like skin. A single table stood at the room's center, upon which lay a single book, open as if expecting him. The pages were blank. Darren frowned, running his fingers across the aged parchment. It was rough, uneven, as though it had been stitched together from something that had once lived. A noise behind him, soft, almost like a sigh, made him turn sharply. The door had swung shut. He hadn't heard it move. The room was suddenly darker, though no lights had gone out. The silence felt different now, no longer the stillness of an abandoned place, but a presence, thick and aware. Darren exhaled, shaking his head. He was being ridiculous. Libraries creaked. Old books smelled strange. His mind was playing tricks on him. And yet, when he looked back at the book, the pages were no longer blank. His own name had appeared, scrawled in ink as red as fresh blood. The sentence beneath it sent ice through his veins. "You are the first to arrive. Midnight finds all who stay." His breath hitched. The words had not been there moments ago. He traced a finger along the ink, only to find it wet. His pulse pounded in his ears, drowning out rational thought. Someone had written this. Someone who knew his name. Someone who had expected him. The lights flickered and the air grew colder. A whisper, not a voice, but the suggestion of one, threaded through the silence, curling around his ears like a lover's breath. Darren took a step back, his instincts screaming at him to leave. But then, something moved in the corner of his vision, a shadow, shifting without source. And just as he turned to face it, the book's pages began to turn on their own, faster and faster, filling the room with a sound that was not quite paper, not quite wind. The words that appeared made his stomach drop. "Midnight finds all who stay." He reached for the door. The handle did not budge. Darren Holloway's breath came fast and shallow. The library's silence had deepened, thickening into something that pressed against his skin. The brass door handle refused to budge, no matter how hard he twisted. The message on the book's pages remained unchanged, the ink glistening as if freshly written. "Midnight finds all who stay." He glanced at his watch, 7:13 p.m. He had time, plenty of time. If he could find the librarian, Perhaps she could explain the strange message or, at the very least, let him out. Leaving the book behind, Darren forced himself to walk instead of run. The West Wing's corridor stretched ahead, but something about its proportions felt wrong. The shadows pooled deeper in the corners, and the bookshelves along the walls seemed taller, their tops disappearing into the darkness. He could have sworn they hadn't been so imposing before. When he finally reached the main hall, relief flooded his chest. The familiar reading desks, the large stained glass window depicting St. Augustine, and the librarian's desk, all exactly as he had left them. But the librarian was gone. "Hello." His voice echoed in a way that it shouldn't have in a room this size. The library swallowed sound too eagerly, as if hungry for it. He rounded the desk, looking for a note, a bell, anything to summon her. Instead, he found a single sheet of paper lying atop an enormous leather-bound ledger. The handwriting was jagged, rushed. "You must leave before midnight. If the door is locked, find the passage. It will be watching." The message sent a pulse of cold through his spine. Find the passage? He looked around, suddenly aware of how vast the library truly was. He had read once that old buildings often had hidden doors, secret compartments meant for maintenance or, in rare cases, escape routes. But why would he need an escape route? Then, from a second-floor balcony, a soft sound broke the quiet, a page turning. Darren froze. The librarian was there, seated at the far end of the balcony, her black dress blending into the shadows. She wasn't reading, wasn't moving, yet the book in front of her flipped its own pages at a steady, unnatural pace. He swallowed hard. "Excuse me." Her head snapped up, not turned, snapped. Darren took a step back. The librarian's face was unchanged, still sharp and severe, but something about her eyes had shifted. They were too dark now. The pupils expanded into an abyssal void that reflected nothing. The book in front of her stopped turning its pages. "You must leave," she said, her voice an eerie whisper. "The book has chosen you." A chill crept up his arms. "What book?" Her gaze flickered toward the West Wing. "It calls. It always calls." Darren turned toward the corridor he had just left. The distant room was no longer bathed in warm lamplight, but in a dim, sickly glow, like candlelight struggling against a void. The book was waiting. He looked back at the librarian, but she was gone. The chair where she had sat was empty, the book before her now closed. The library, for the first time since he had entered, felt truly abandoned. Darren's hands trembled as he backed away from the balcony. The librarian had vanished as if she had never been there at all, but the weight of her words lingered in the air. "The book has chosen you." He didn't know what that meant, but he did know one thing. He had to leave. His footsteps echoed unnaturally through the vast reading hall as he hurried toward the main entrance. The great double doors stood tall before him, their aged wood marred by decades of wear. He gripped the brass handles and pulled. The doors did not move. He tried again, throwing his weight into it. Nothing. They were locked. His heartbeat quickened. There had to be another way out. He spun, scanning the room for emergency exits or windows large enough to slip through. That was when he noticed something strange. The library was changing. The stained glass window depicting St. Augustine was different. Earlier, the saint had been portrayed with a book in his hands, a symbol of knowledge and wisdom. Now the book was gone. His hands were empty, outstretched, reaching, as if pleading. Darren took a step back. The bookshelves lining the hall seemed taller, their spines worn and cracked as though they had aged 100 years in mere minutes. The very air inside the library felt heavier, charged with something unseen but palpable. Then came the whispering. At first, it was barely audible, a faint rustling that could have been the sound of pages turning in a distant room. But as Darren stood frozen, the whispers grew louder, threading through the air like wind slithering through cracks in the walls. They were not human voices. They were dry and brittle, like parchment scraping against itself. His breath caught as he turned toward the sound. The shelves were moving, not dramatically, just a slow, imperceptible shift as if the library were breathing around him. He was no longer certain of the way he had come. The corridors seemed deeper, the aisles darker. His own shadow stretched unnaturally long beneath the flickering lamps. Then, from the far end of the room, he heard it. A single page turning. Darren's stomach twisted. He knew where it was coming from. The West Wing. The book was calling. Darren's pulse thundered in his ears as he turned toward the West Wing. The dim, flickering glow seeping from the corridor stretched unnaturally across the wooden floor, as though the very light resisted being contained. His instinct screamed at him to run, to find another way out, but something deeper, something more insidious, drew him forward. His feet moved before his mind could protest, carrying him down the elongated corridor. The shelves on either side loomed like sentinels, their spines cracked and ancient, their titles faded beyond recognition. The whispering had grown softer but more distinct, words brushing against his consciousness like a memory half-formed. Turn the page. Let us see. Let us see. At the end of the hall stood the reading table, and atop it the book. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Its cover was not leather, nor cloth, nor any material he could name. It pulsed slightly, as if it were alive. Symbols, ancient and unknowable, were etched into its surface, shifting whenever his eyes tried to focus on them. Despite the room's stillness, the pages turned, one by one, at a steady rhythm. Darren swallowed hard. This was the book the librarian had spoken of, the one that had chosen him. His fingers hovered over the cover, trembling. He knew, instinctively, that he should not touch it, that something about this book defied the natural order of things. And yet, he could not look away. It was calling to him, not with words, but with a hunger that curled around his very thoughts. His fingers brushed the cover. The whispering ceased. The silence that followed was not just an absence of sound. It was the absence of everything. No breath, no heartbeat, no sense of time. The world around him seemed to tilt, the walls stretching impossibly far away. The only thing that remained clear was the book beneath his hands. Then, in the space between heartbeats, the pages flipped violently on their own, landing open on a passage written in deep, glistening ink. The words seemed to rearrange themselves as he read, forming a message meant only for him. The door you seek is behind a shelf, but it is not the only thing waiting. Darren's breath shuddered out of him. Behind him, something moved. Darren's body locked in place, every nerve screaming at him to turn around. The air had shifted, thickened, as though the very atmosphere behind him had been displaced by something vast and unseen. The book before him remained open, the ink shimmering as if it had only just dried. The door you seek is behind a shelf, but it is not the only thing waiting. A slow, deliberate breath filled his lungs. He could feel the weight of something lurking behind him, something watching, its presence pressing against the edges of his mind. Every instinct told him to run, but there was nowhere to go. The entrance was locked, the librarian had vanished, and the library itself was shifting, twisting its corridors like a living thing. With painstaking caution, Darren turned his head just enough to catch a glimpse over his shoulder. The shelf had changed. The once organized rows of books were now warped, leaning at impossible angles, forming jagged patterns that seemed to pulse with something unnatural. The shadows between them had deepened, no longer just an absence of light, but something else entirely, something that shifted and breathed. Then, a book slid from the shelf without being touched. Darren swallowed hard as it landed on the floor with a soft thud. It lay there, its cover facing up, blank and unmarked. But the moment his gaze fell upon it, the whispering began again, no longer scattered voices, but one single voice, close, intimate. Turn the page. Darren recoiled, shaking his head. He wouldn't fall for it. Whatever was happening, whatever force had awakened in this cursed place, it was trying to pull him deeper. He forced his focus back to the book on the table, the one that had given him the message. The door behind the shelf. Gritting his teeth, he took a step toward the nearest bookcase. The whispering flared in protest, the very air rippling as though disturbed by unseen hands. Ignoring it, Darren pressed against the massive wooden shelf and pushed. At first, nothing happened, but then, with a deep, reluctant groan, the entire structure shifted. The The books lining its surface trembled, some tumbling to the floor as the weight of the shelf dragged along the old wooden floor. Behind it, just as the book had foretold, stood a door. Unlike the rest of the library, it was pristine, untouched by dust, carved from dark wood with no handle, no lock, only an inscription burned into its surface. The words were in the same shifting script as those in the book, constantly rewriting themselves before Darren could fully comprehend their meaning. His pulse pounded. This was it. But then, from the darkness beyond the shelves, something stepped forward. Darren's breath hitched as a shape emerged from the shadows beyond the shelves. It moved unnaturally, like a puppet with its strings cut and then reattached haphazardly. Its limbs were long, too long, and its head tilted at an unsettling angle. The dim light from the library's chandeliers flickered as though recoiling from its presence. The figure didn't walk. It glided, shifting forward without a sound. Darren instinctively stepped back, pressing himself against the door that had appeared behind the bookshelf. His mind screamed at him to move, to run, but his body refused to obey. The thing had no clear face, only a smooth, featureless surface where its eyes should have been. But somehow, he knew it was looking directly at him. The whispering returned, but this time it was different. The voices no longer spoke in hushed, unreadable tones. They pleaded, "Do not open it." Darren's trembling hand grazed the inscription on the door. The letters burned beneath his fingers, shifting, twisting, rewriting themselves faster than his mind could process. The creature took another step forward, its presence warping the space around it. The books on the shelves nearest to it blackened, their pages curling into ash. Then, without warning, the whispers stopped. The silence was more terrifying than the voices had ever been. Darren's pulse pounded in his ears, his body drenched in cold sweat. The creature stood just feet away now, its elongated arms dangling at its sides, its presence and absence of everything. The air, the light, even time itself seemed to dissolve around it. The door behind him vibrated. Darren clenched his jaw. The book had led him here. It had told him this was his way out. But now, something was telling him that opening this door might be worse than facing whatever this thing was. His fingers hesitated over the inscription. The creature took another step. Darren could see it clearly now. Its skin, if it could be called that, was paper thin, etched with writing. Not scars, not wounds, words. Pages of text written across its entire form in a language he could not comprehend. As it drew closer, the letters shifted, twisting themselves into something he could understand. "You were never meant to read." A sudden, deep boom echoed from behind the door. Darren's body jerked in response. The vibration rattled his bones. Whatever was on the other side had hurt him. The creature twitched, its head snapping toward the door as if noticing it for the first time. It recoiled, not in fear, but in something that resembled recognition. The unreadable text across its body flickered, distorting. Darren didn't know what he was doing, only that he had seconds to decide. With a breath that felt like it might be his last, he reached for the door and pushed. Darren's fingers barely brushed the door when it swung open on its own. A gust of air, cold, dry, and impossibly vast, rushed past him, carrying the scent of something ancient, something forgotten. The library's dim light failed to penetrate the space beyond the threshold. It was not darkness in the usual sense. It was a void, an absence of light, of sound, of existence itself. The creature, the thing made of shifting words, froze. Its elongated limbs trembled, and for the first time, Darren sensed hesitation in its movements. The text across its body flickered violently, the words rewriting themselves so fast that its form seemed unstable, as though reality itself was struggling to hold it together. Then it stepped backward. Darren's chest heaved as he realized something horrifying. It was afraid of what was beyond the door. But before he could process the implications, the library around him began to change. The bookshelves groaned, their once sturdy frames warping like melting wax. The floorboards beneath his feet shifted, as though the very foundation of the building was unraveling. The ceiling expanded upward, stretching into an impossible height, the chandeliers now distant, like stars barely visible in the night sky. And then he heard it, a sound from within the void. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a growl. It was a word, but one he could not comprehend, spoken in a voice that did not belong to a human throat. It came from everywhere and nowhere, slipping into his ears and bypassing his mind, burrowing straight into the deepest parts of his understanding. Darren's knees buckled, his vision swimming. His hands gripped the edge of the doorframe, struggling to resist the pull of whatever force had begun reaching through. The air itself tilted, reality bending in ways that defied all logic. The creature in the library let out a sound. It was not a scream, not a cry, but something in between, something wrong. The words on its body flared, burned, and then, in a single jerking motion, it tore itself apart. The pages that made up its form scattered into the air, turning into unreadable fragments before vanishing into nothingness. Whatever it had been, it was no more. Darren gasped, his breath ragged. The thing was gone, but the door was still open, and the presence beyond it was still watching. His mind screamed for him to shut the door, to turn and run, but something held him there, curiosity, terror, or something else entirely. Because now, within the void, he could see something moving. It was not a creature, not a shadow, not anything he could name, but it was coming closer. Darren stood paralyzed at the threshold, staring into the swirling abyss beyond the door. The space inside wasn't just dark, it was wrong. It had no walls, no floor, no ceiling, yet it felt like it was watching him. A deep, endless nothingness, but within it, something moved. At first, it was subtle, a faint ripple, like a disturbance on still water. Then, the shadows shifted, congealing into something that should not be. The shape was neither human nor beast, its form too fluid, too alien to fit into the rules of the world Darren understood. It moved with the slow certainty of a nightmare, not stepping, not gliding, simply being closer now than it had been a second ago. His breath caught in his throat as the thing revealed an eye, not in the center of a face, not attached to a body, but floating, independent, turning toward him with an intelligence that felt ancient. It pulsed, its surface reflecting words, symbols, equations that had no meaning, but Darren understood them anyway. They filled his mind like an infection, pressing into the corners of his consciousness where they did not belong. Something inside him shifted, something broke. The door shuddered, vibrating with an unseen force. The library behind him was changing again, books levitating, their pages flipping wildly as if screaming. The walls breathed, their edges expanding and contracting as if the entire structure was alive. The very air became heavy, pressing down on him like he was standing beneath the weight of an ocean. And yet, despite every rational part of his mind telling him to run, his feet remained glued to the ground. His fingers trembled, his heartbeat an erratic drum inside his chest. He could hear his own breath, ragged and shallow, but something else was breathing too. The eye in the void blinked, and Darren felt something inside him blink back. His hands shot to his face, fingers pressing into his skin as if to confirm that he was still real, that he was still himself. The pressure in his skull mounted, thoughts unraveling like threads pulled from an ancient tapestry. A voice, not his own, spoke from the void. It was neither loud nor quiet, neither harsh nor kind. It simply was, and it filled every corner of his being. "You are not supposed to be here." The words came not as sound, but as understanding, as if they had always been there, waiting for him to notice. The doorframe beneath his fingers cracked, its wood splitting apart like dried bone. The library's world and the void's world were no longer separate. The two were merging, colliding in ways that defied logic. Darren finally found his voice, though it was weak, barely a whisper. "Who are you?" The thing in the void laughed. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe it was just his mind trying to interpret something that was beyond comprehension. The eye blinked again, and suddenly, Darren was falling. Not forward, not backward but sideways into a space where time did not exist. And then the door slammed shut. Darren woke up somewhere else. The library was gone, or maybe it had never been there at all. He was lying on something solid, but it didn't feel like wood or stone. It was smooth, impossibly cold, and seemed to pulse beneath him like it was alive. His breath echoed, but not in the way it should. It bounced back distorted, like the air itself was twisting his sound into something unfamiliar. His hands moved instinctively, feeling for the ground, for something tangible. The surface beneath him had no texture, no weight. It was like resting on the concept of a floor rather than an actual one. He pushed himself upright, his muscles slow to respond, his limbs aching as if he had been asleep for centuries. There was no light, and yet he could see. The space around him was vast, endless, but defined not by walls or objects, but by a sense of limitation, like being trapped in a box with no walls. There was no sky, no ceiling, only an oppressive weight pressing in from all directions. And then Darren realized something horrifying. He could not remember how he had gotten here. The last thing he recalled was the door, the eye, the laugh that wasn't a laugh, and then nothing. A blank space in his memory, stretching between the moment he had fallen and the moment he had woken up. Was it minutes? Hours? Years? His fingers twitched. His breathing quickened. The feeling of wrongness settled deep in his bones. Then something spoke. It wasn't the voice from before. This one was closer, whispering just beside his ear, though when he turned his head, there was no one there. The words were not spoken in English or in any language he knew, and yet he understood them with terrifying clarity. How much of yourself did you lose? Darren's body went rigid. He wanted to reply, to ask who was there, to demand an explanation, but his throat felt filled with sand. His own thoughts betrayed him, twisting inward, suffocating under the weight of something vast, something old. He tried to recall his name. For a split second, it was gone. A hollow panic bloomed in his chest, but then it snapped back into place. Darren. He was Darren. But why had it slipped? Why had his own identity flickered? Even for a moment. The whisper came again, closer this time. You do not belong in this story. And then, as suddenly as it had vanished, the library returned. Darren was back. The bookshelves towered around him, the scent of paper and dust filling his lungs. The chandelier overhead flickered as if nothing had changed, as if he had never left. But something had changed. He could feel it deep in his core. His hands clenched into fists. His body was whole, but something was missing. And then his eyes landed on the bookshelf in front of him. His breath hitched. One of the books was different, one that hadn't been there before. Its title was his own name. Darren approached the shelf with an unsettling mix of curiosity and dread. The book was old, its cover worn and frayed at the edges. The title, embossed in fading gold letters, read simply, Darren. His fingers brushed against the spine, and a wave of recognition washed over him, as if the book were an extension of himself, an artifact from a past he could barely remember. The library felt alive around him, the very air thrumming with energy, as if it, too, recognized the significance of the book. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting and flickering as if drawn to his presence. He hesitated, every instinct urging him to turn away, yet a deeper pull, a need to know, drew him closer. As he opened the cover, a cloud of dust erupted into the air, swirling around him like tiny spirits escaping from their prison. The pages were filled with a strange language, symbols that were both familiar and utterly foreign, weaving together stories he could not comprehend. But at the same time, he felt as though they were unspooling memories from his mind, forgotten but not lost. He turned the pages slowly, each one revealing fragments of a life he could not fully grasp. There were moments of joy, laughter, and warmth, but intertwined were shadows of fear, loss, and betrayal. Faces appeared, some he recognized, others were merely hazy forms, but all felt eerily familiar. He was both the author and the protagonist of this story. Suddenly, the letters began to shimmer. The text transformed into images, replaying scenes from his life, yet distorting them in unsettling ways. He saw himself as a child, laughing with friends, but then the laughter turned into sobs, the smiles twisted into masks of anguish. Darren slammed the book shut, heart racing, but the world around him did not respond to his fear. The library held its breath, as if waiting for him to make the next move. He felt an insatiable urge to delve deeper, to understand not just the memories, but the truth behind them. But just as he opened the book again, the air crackled with an unseen force. The shadows in the corners of the library began to stir, dark figures emerging from the depths. They hovered at the edges of his vision, their forms flickering like faulty film, whispering unintelligible words that seemed to echo off the walls. Darren gripped the book tightly, a feeling of possession washing over him. He could feel the energy radiating from its pages, a pulse that matched his own heartbeat. It was as if the book was aware of him, aware of what had been lost and what he needed to find. "You're in control, Darren," he muttered to himself, though his voice felt like a fragile thing in the face of the encroaching shadows. The words felt hollow, a mantra to hold back the rising tide of panic. With resolve, he opened the book once more. The words surged forward, the images intensifying, and as he read, he began to understand. This was more than a book. It was a reflection of his soul, a map of the paths he had taken and those he had yet to explore. In the depths of the pages, he found a phrase that seemed to glow, almost alive. To reclaim what is lost, one must confront the darkness. At that moment, Darren understood. This library was not merely a collection of books. It was a living repository of his past, a labyrinth where he would have to confront every shadow, every fear, to reclaim the pieces of himself that had slipped away. The shadows grew bolder, swirling around him like a storm. With a deep breath, he closed his eyes and focused on the words in the book, ready to face whatever lay ahead, determined to uncover the truths that had been buried within him for far too long. Darren felt an odd sense of calm wash over him as he opened the book once again. The dim light of the library seemed to glow brighter, illuminating the pages filled with his memories. The shadows, though still swirling around him, now felt less like a threat and more like a curtain, shrouding the truths he needed to uncover. Each page turned, the fabric of his existence began to weave itself into a cohesive narrative. The first image that unfolded was of a room, his childhood bedroom. He saw himself as a young boy, lying on the floor surrounded by action figures and comic books, the sunlight streaming through the window. The boy looked happy, a grin plastered across his face, but then a fleeting shadow crossed the window. It was the first sign of the darkness that would eventually invade his life, a harbinger of the disappointment and loss to come. The next image blurred, shifting from innocence to chaos. He was now a teenager, standing in the middle of a school hallway, filled with students bustling about. The laughter echoed, but it felt distant, overshadowed by a sense of isolation that clung to him like a thick fog. He remembered that moment, his heart racing as he tried to fit in, but always feeling like an outsider, invisible to those around him. Suddenly, a new scene emerged. Darren stood in the same hallway, but now as an adult, pacing anxiously, clutching a letter in his hand. The paper was crumpled, the ink smudged from his sweating palms. It was a rejection letter from a publisher, one he had poured his soul into. The disappointment had crushed him that day, the shadows growing deeper as he began to question his worth as a writer. Each memory seemed to resonate within him, opening wounds he thought had healed. But rather than causing pain, these recollections stirred something else, a deep resolve. He realized that every setback, every moment of doubt had been instrumental in shaping him. The shadows around him began to morph, transforming from intimidating phantoms into reminders of his resilience. Yet, as the narrative unfolded, a darker figure emerged. An older man with sharp features and an unforgiving gaze appeared in his memories, his father. The memory of their final confrontation loomed before him, a moment filled with regret and harsh words exchanged during a heated argument. Darren felt the anguish of that day crashing over him like a wave. He could feel the sting of his father's dismissal still echoing in his heart. As he witnessed this moment, something strange began to happen. The shadows coalesced into a singular form, one that bore an unsettling resemblance to his father. The figure loomed closer, and Darren's pulse quickened. The weight of unspoken words, of unresolved issues, hung thick in the air. "You are a failure," the shadow of his father whispered, and the library quaked with the intensity of the accusation. The very air seemed to thicken with an overwhelming heaviness. Darren felt the impulse to retreat, but the urge to confront this specter surged within him. He understood now that this was not merely a memory, but a representation of the burden he had carried for far too long. "No, I am not," he shouted, the echo of his voice reverberating through the library. The shadows faltered momentarily, revealing glimpses of other memories, a time when he had succeeded, when he had written words that had resonated, when he had been proud of himself. With newfound determination, he stepped forward, confronting the shadow. "I define who I am. You do not hold power over me anymore." Each word felt like a hammer striking a nail, piercing through the veil of doubt that had clouded his vision. The shadow flickered, and in that moment of defiance, it began to dissolve, the darkness receding as if afraid of the light Darren had ignited within himself. The library, once ominous and foreboding, now felt less suffocating, as if the very essence of the room shifted with his declaration. In that moment, Darren realized that the past did not define him. Instead, it was a series of lessons, some painful, some enlightening, that had ultimately contributed to his growth. The shadows had not just haunted him. They had also illuminated his path forward. He could write again. He could confront every shadow that emerged, reclaiming the power that was rightfully his. The book pulsed in his hands, and Darren felt a sense of hope welling up within him. The pages had become a guide, a testament to his journey, and he was ready to face whatever else awaited him in this labyrinth of his past. With renewed strength, he prepared to turn the page and delve deeper into the narrative, eager to uncover more truths that awaited in the heart of the library. As Darren turned the page of the book, he felt a shift in the atmosphere. The air seemed charged with energy, as if the very essence of a library was responding to his newfound resolve. He was no longer just a passive observer of his memories. He was an active participant in the unfolding narrative. The shadows that once intimidated him now felt like allies, guiding him toward the deeper truths he needed to confront. The next scene he encountered was a vivid recollection of his college years. He was surrounded by friends, laughter echoing in a sunlit courtyard as they celebrated the end of finals week. He could feel the camaraderie, the joy, and the sense of belonging that had enveloped him. Yet, as he watched, the scene faded into a quieter moment, a stark contrast to the vibrancy of celebration. He saw himself sitting alone in a dimly lit room, surrounded by crumpled papers, struggling with writer's block. The weight of expectations pressed heavily on his shoulders, and the joy of creation felt like a distant memory. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted again. A thunderous roar echoed through the library, shaking the very foundations of his memories. The images around him began to blur, swirling together like storm clouds, and he felt a sense of foreboding creeping in. In that moment, he was no longer in the safe confines of his memories. He was thrust into a dark and twisted reality. Darren found himself standing before a massive door, ancient and ornately carved, pulsating with an eerie light. It loomed before him, inviting yet menacing. As he reached for the handle, he hesitated, his heart racing. Behind that door lay the truth he had been avoiding, the painful memories he feared would consume him. The whispers of the shadows grew louder, urging him forward. "Face it," they echoed, resonating within the library's walls. With a deep breath, Darren turned the handle and pushed the door open. A blinding light flooded the space, illuminating the dark corners of the library that had remained shrouded in mystery. As the light enveloped him, he He felt a surge of power coursing through his veins. He was not just a spectator anymore. He was ready to confront the demons that had haunted him for far too long. Inside, the room was vast and filled with books that represented every moment of his life, both the triumphs and the failures. Each tome appeared alive, pulsating with energy, waiting for him to uncover the stories hidden within their pages. The air crackled with anticipation, and Darren felt a deep connection to this space, as if it were a part of him. As he approached a book on a pedestal, its cover bore his name once again. This time, however, it was adorned with symbols that represented fear and self-doubt. As he opened the book, he was plunged into a memory that threatened to drown him. He found himself in his childhood home, the walls echoing with the harsh words of his father, casting a long shadow over his self-worth. "You'll never amount to anything," the voice boomed, reverberating in his mind. Darren felt the weight of those words crushing him, but amidst the turmoil, something shifted. He saw himself as a child, wide-eyed and full of dreams, untainted by the negativity that would come to define his relationship with his father. The innocence of that child struck a chord within him, igniting a flicker of hope. "I am more than their words," he whispered, his voice steadying as he clung to the memory of possibility. Suddenly, the room began to change again. The shadows coalesced into figures of his past, reflecting the faces of friends, mentors, and those who had believed in him, even when he had doubted himself. Each figure reached out, urging him to recognize his strength, to see the potential that had always existed within him. The once menacing shadows transformed into a circle of support, a reminder that he was never truly alone. With this realization, Darren felt a wave of empowerment surge through him. He was ready to reclaim his narrative, to own every part of his journey, the successes, the failures, and the shadows. He closed the book and turned to face the vastness of the library, a sense of purpose igniting within him. He understood now that the darkness he had feared was not something to escape, but a part of him to embrace. The light that had flooded the room dimmed slightly, but it was no longer threatening. It was a comforting glow that enveloped him, guiding him toward the next chapter of his life. With renewed determination, Darren prepared to step out of the shadows and into the light, ready to confront whatever lay ahead. The library was not just a space of memory. It was a gateway to his future, and he was ready to walk through it. With a newfound sense of empowerment coursing through him, Darren stepped out of the vast room, leaving behind the echoes of his past. The library, once a foreboding labyrinth of shadows, now felt alive and inviting. He was no longer a victim of his circumstances. Instead, he embraced his role as the architect of his narrative. As he navigated through the stacks of books, he felt an insatiable curiosity guiding him. Each title seemed to whisper secrets, beckoning him to explore deeper. The towering shelves formed a maze, each turn revealing new paths and hidden alcoves. The shadows, which once represented fear and doubt, now flickered like fireflies, illuminating the way. The library felt expansive yet intimate, a place where every corner held the promise of discovery. Darren was determined to uncover the stories that lay hidden within its depths, believing that the answers to his struggles awaited him among the dusty tomes. As he wandered deeper into the maze, Darren encountered a series of mirrors reflecting distorted versions of himself. Each mirror showed a different aspect of his life, his failures, his insecurities, and his moments of triumph. He stood before each reflection, forcing himself to confront the truths that had shaped him. One mirror showed a version of himself, hunched over a desk, overwhelmed by self-doubt. Another depicted a confident writer, pen in hand, surrounded by accolades and admiration. These reflections made him realize the duality of his existence. He understood that both the fearful and the triumphant versions of himself were valid. They coexisted within him, shaping his journey. He recognized that to move forward, he needed to embrace both aspects of his identity. The shadows had been casting doubt, but they were also essential parts of his growth. Each reflection reminded him that he had the power to rewrite his story, to redefine what success meant to him. As he continued through the library, he stumbled upon an ornate archway draped in ivy. It beckoned him closer, and without hesitation, he stepped through it. On the other side, he found himself in a room filled with ancient scrolls, their surfaces shimmering with mysterious symbols. The air was thick with the scent of parchment and ink, invoking a sense of reverence. Here, he sensed that he was about to uncover something monumental, something that could change the trajectory of his life. One scroll caught his eye, glowing with a faint light. As he unrolled it, he was transported to a different time, a moment in history where writers were revered as visionaries. He saw gatherings of scholars and artists, where ideas flowed like wine, and creativity thrived in a world that celebrated expression. The sight filled him with longing, a desire to be part of something larger than himself. He realized that writing was not just about individual success. It was a collective experience that connected people across time and space. As he immersed himself in this memory, Darren felt a familiar figure approach, his college professor, the one who had first ignited his passion for storytelling. The professor spoke with fervor, encouraging him to pursue his dreams fearlessly. "Every word you write has the power to resonate, to change lives," he urged. Darren felt a surge of gratitude wash over him. This was the encouragement he had needed, a reminder that his voice mattered, and it was essential to share it with the world. When Darren returned to the library, the scroll now rested in his hands. He understood that he could take this energy and inspiration back to his own writing. The fears that had held him captive began to lose their grip. Instead of seeing them as obstacles, he viewed them as essential ingredients in the alchemical process of creativity. Each setback became a stepping stone, leading him closer to the authentic expression of his voice. With this new perspective, he ventured further into the library, now a labyrinth of possibility. He felt compelled to document his experiences, to distill the essence of his journey into words. Each step resonated with purpose, and he sensed that the library was guiding him toward his next chapter. As he explored, he discovered more alcoves filled with stories waiting to be told. He reached for a book that seemed to call out to him, its spine adorned with vibrant colors. When he opened it, he found it was a collection of stories written by aspiring authors, each tale echoing the struggles and triumphs of the human spirit. In that moment, Darren realized that he was not alone in his journey. Countless others had navigated similar paths, battling their shadows and emerging stronger. Empowered by this understanding, he made a promise to himself. He would not only write his story, but also lift others with his words. He would create a space where creativity thrived, where voices could rise above the noise of doubt and fear. With every step deeper into the labyrinth, he felt the shadows fading, replaced by a burgeoning light that illuminated the path ahead. The library had transformed into a sanctuary of hope, a testament to resilience and the power of storytelling. With a renewed sense of purpose and clarity, Darren ventured deeper into the library, his heart racing with anticipation. Each step felt purposeful, as if he were following an unseen path woven through the very fabric of the building. The dimly lit corridors twisted and turned, revealing more alcoves filled with ancient books and untold stories. The atmosphere buzzed with energy, whispering to him like a gentle breeze, urging him to uncover the secrets that had long been hidden within the library's depths. As he rounded a corner, Darren stumbled upon a secluded reading nook, its cozy embrace inviting him to pause and reflect. The space was adorned with plush cushions and flickering candlelight, creating an atmosphere that felt almost sacred. He sank into one of the cushions, allowing himself to absorb the tranquility around him. It was here, amidst the quiet, that he felt a profound connection to the history of the library, a place where countless souls had come seeking solace and inspiration, just as he was. Curiosity piqued. Darren reached for a book resting on the small wooden table beside him. Its cover was tattered, and the pages appeared fragile. but the title caught his eye, Whispers of the Forgotten. As he opened the book, the scent of aged paper wafted toward him, igniting a sense of nostalgia. The stories within spoke of lost tales, those that had slipped through the cracks of history, overshadowed by more prominent narratives. He was captivated by the idea of reclaiming these voices, bringing them back into the light. As he read, he encountered stories of unsung heroes, individuals whose struggles and triumphs have been overshadowed by the passage of time. Each narrative resonated deeply, echoing the challenges he had faced in his own life. He found solace in the realization that he was not alone in his fight against obscurity. There were others who had battled against the tides of fate, and their stories deserved to be told. The book became a mirror, reflecting his own experiences and inspiring him to honor the voices of the forgotten. Driven by a newfound resolve, Darren envisioned his own writing taking shape in a way that would amplify these stories. He imagined weaving the narratives of the past with his present, creating a tapestry that celebrated resilience, creativity, and the indomitable human spirit. The act of writing transformed from a solitary endeavor into a communal experience, one that sought to connect readers with the rich history of humanity. He felt a burning desire to document not only his journey, but also those of others who had walked similar paths. As he delved deeper into Whispers of the Forgotten, Darren came across a section that discussed the power of storytelling to heal and connect communities. The words resonated with him, igniting a flicker of hope within his heart. He realized that storytelling was not merely a form of expression. It was a lifeline that could bridge gaps, foster understanding, and cultivate empathy. In a world often divided by differences, stories had the power to unite individuals, transcending barriers of culture, time, and experience. Motivated by this revelation, Darren resolved to create a space for storytelling within the library, a sanctuary where voices could be shared, heard, and celebrated. He envisioned an event where aspiring writers could come together to share their narratives, encouraging one another in their respective journeys. The library, once shrouded in darkness, would become a beacon of light, illuminating the paths of those seeking connection and purpose through their words. With his mind racing with ideas, Darren's determination grew. He began to outline a plan for the event, imagining workshops, readings, and opportunities for collaboration. He would invite local writers, artists, and community members to participate, fostering a sense of belonging and encouragement. This would be his way of giving back to the library that had nurtured him, transforming it into a space that honored the forgotten while empowering new voices to emerge. As he closed the book, Darren felt a sense of responsibility wash over him. He was not just a storyteller. He was a steward of the narratives that needed to be shared. The shadows that had once loomed large in his mind began to dissipate, replaced by a vibrant vision of what could be. He understood that the library's walls held more than just books. They housed the collective wisdom of humanity, waiting to be uncovered and celebrated. Leaving the cozy nook behind, Darren set out on a new mission, one that would weave together the threads of past and present, creating a rich tapestry of stories that resonated with truth and authenticity. He felt invigorated, ready to embrace the challenges ahead as he transformed his vision into reality. The library was no longer just a place of reflection. It had become a launching pad for connection, creativity, and the sharing of voices that had long been silenced. With each step he took, he knew he was forging a path that would lead to something extraordinary, not only for himself, but for the community he cherished. With a firm resolve in his heart, Darren immersed himself in the planning of the storytelling event, eager to breathe life into his vision. He believed that the library was a treasure trove of narratives waiting to be unearthed, and that it could serve as a platform for individuals to share their stories. As he moved through the aisles of books, he felt a sense of urgency. It was as if the spirits of the past were urging him to act swiftly. Each book he passed whispered promises of adventure and wisdom, further fueling his determination. Darren began to draft invitations for local writers and artists, excitedly envisioning their reactions when they received the news. The idea of uniting a diverse group of individuals to celebrate the power of storytelling filled him with joy. He included a brief description of the event, emphasizing the importance of sharing personal experiences and forgotten tales. His hope was that this gathering would ignite a spark of inspiration within others, encouraging them to find their voice and share their truths. As he worked, the library continued to reveal its secrets. One afternoon, while arranging chairs in the reading nook, he discovered a hidden panel behind one of the bookshelves. Intrigued, he pressed against it, and with a soft creak, the panel swung open to reveal a narrow passageway. Heart racing, Darren felt a mix of excitement and trepidation as he stepped inside. The dim light illuminated dusty shelves lined with volumes that had been untouched for years. The atmosphere within the passage was thick with history, and as he explored, Darren felt a profound connection to the authors who had once walked this path. Each book held the weight of untold stories, their pages filled with whispers of dreams, desires, and heartaches. He pulled out a few tomes, brushing off the dust that had accumulated over the years. The titles intrigued him, revealing tales of love, loss, and redemption, stories that had long been overshadowed by the passage of time. As he leafed through the pages, Darren felt a wave of inspiration wash over him. He recognized that these forgotten narratives were not just relics of the past. They were echoes of the human experience that needed to be shared. The library was a living entity, its walls alive with the emotions and struggles of those who had come before. He realized that his event could serve as a bridge, connecting the past to the present and allowing new voices to emerge from the shadows. Motivated by this discovery, Darren envisioned incorporating some of these forgotten tales into the storytelling event. He would curate a selection of stories from the dusty volumes, weaving them together with contemporary narratives. By juxtaposing the past and present, he hoped to demonstrate that the human experience transcends time, highlighting the universal themes that resonate with all people. He could invite participants to reflect on how these stories mirrored their own lives, creating a shared experience that would deepen their connection to one another. Returning to the reading nook, Darren meticulously crafted a schedule for the event. He planned to host workshops where participants could hone their writing skills, share their stories, and receive feedback in a supportive environment. He envisioned guest speakers who had successfully navigated their own creative journeys, offering wisdom and encouragement to those just beginning to find their voice. The library, once a place of solitude, would transform into a vibrant hub of creativity and connection. As the days passed, Darren's excitement grew, yet he felt a gnawing anxiety bubbling beneath the surface. Doubts crept into his mind. What if no one showed up? What if his vision fell flat? He struggled with the fear of vulnerability that often accompanied sharing one's work. But with each moment spent in the library, he found solace in the knowledge that the stories waiting to be told were worth the risk. They were a reminder that growth often comes from stepping outside one's comfort zone and embracing the unknown. In his quieter moments, Darren often returned to the hidden passageway, feeling a sense of reverence as he explored its depths. Each visit revealed new insights and stories that fueled his passion. He imagined the authors who had once written in this space, their hopes and dreams echoing through the ages. They had poured their hearts into their work, and he felt a responsibility to honor their legacies. In doing so, he would create a space for others to follow suit, where they could share their truths without fear of judgment. With the event date approaching, Darren's preparations intensified. He reached out to local organizations, inviting them to participate and spread the word. He plastered flyers around town, sharing details of the event and the importance of storytelling in fostering community and understanding. As the days dwindled, he felt a sense of excitement mingled with trepidation. Would his vision resonate with others? Would they join him in this celebration of storytelling? As he stood in the library's main hall on the eve of the event, Darren felt a rush of emotions. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow through the large windows. He took a deep breath, grounding himself in the present moment. This was his chance to create something beautiful, a gathering that would honor the echoes of the past while paving the way for new stories to be told. With a heart full of hope, he prepared to welcome his community into the library, eager to witness the magic that would unfold. The day of the storytelling event dawned with a vibrant energy that seemed to pulse through the very walls of the library. As Darren arrived early to prepare, he felt a rush of anticipation mixed with apprehension. He had spent countless hours organizing this gathering, and now, as the sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the library's intricate architecture, he realized that this was more than just an event. It was a culmination of his dreams, a testament to the power of storytelling and community. As he arranged the chairs in the main hall, Darren reflected on how far he had come since that fateful day when he first stepped into the library, feeling lost and disconnected. The dusty shelves had become a source of inspiration, and he had transformed from a solitary writer into a catalyst for connection. With every flyer posted and every invitation sent, he had invited others to share their stories, to reclaim the narratives that had been silenced, and to create a community that celebrated the diversity of human experience. As the hours ticked by, the library began to fill with participants, each person carrying their own unique story. Darren greeted everyone with warmth, feeling an electric buzz in the air as they exchanged smiles and shared their excitement for the day ahead. The diversity of voices present was a testament to the rich tapestry of life, and Darren felt a profound sense of gratitude for the opportunity to facilitate this gathering. The library, with its towering shelves and hidden passages, was now a sanctuary where stories could flourish. However, as the event began, a sense of unease settled over Darren. He noticed a small group of individuals lingering at the back of the room, their expressions shrouded in shadows. They were older, their faces etched with lines of experience, yet there was an intensity in their demeanor that set them apart from the rest of the attendees. It was as if they were guardians of the library's secrets, and Darren felt a twinge of apprehension as he contemplated their presence. With the first speaker stepping up to the podium, Darren's focus shifted back to the event. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation as stories began to unfold. Participants shared their personal journeys, tales of heartbreak, triumph, and resilience that resonated deeply with the audience. Each narrative became a thread woven into the fabric of the gathering, connecting individuals in a way that transcended time and space. As Darren listened, he realized the impact of storytelling. It had the power to heal, to bridge divides, and to illuminate the shared human experience. However, as the event progressed, Darren's gaze kept drifting back to the shadowy group at the back of the room. Their presence felt unsettling, as if they were waiting for something or someone. He shook off the unease, reminding himself that the day was about the stories being shared, not the distractions that threatened to derail his focus. He was determined to create a safe and nurturing environment for everyone present, where vulnerability was welcomed and voices could be heard without fear of judgment. As the afternoon wore on, Darren introduced a segment dedicated to the forgotten tales he had discovered in the hidden passageway. He read excerpts from the ancient volumes, bringing the stories of unsung heroes to life. The words resonated with the audience, eliciting gasps and laughter, as well as tears. He felt a rush of fulfillment, knowing that he was honoring the legacy of those who had come before while inspiring the present. However, the shadowy group remained a constant presence at the periphery, their intentions still unclear. Then, in the midst of a poignant story, a sudden commotion erupted from the back of the room. The individuals who had been lurking in the shadows rose to their feet, their voices raised in protest. They spoke with an intensity that echoed through the hall, accusing Darren of trespassing on sacred ground. "You have no right to speak for them," one of the members shouted, pointing an accusatory finger in his direction. The sudden confrontation sent a wave of tension rippling through the audience, and Darren felt the air grow thick with uncertainty. Taken aback, Darren struggled to regain his composure. He had not anticipated this reaction, nor did he understand the source of their anger. The event was meant to be a celebration of storytelling, not a battleground for disputes. He took a deep breath, his mind racing as he sought a way to address their concerns without alienating the audience. The gathered participants looked between him and the group, their expressions a mixture of confusion and concern. "Please, let's discuss this," Darren implored, trying to defuse the situation. He could feel his heart racing as he stepped forward, vulnerability on display. "I didn't intend to offend or misrepresent anyone. I believe these stories belong to all of us, and they deserve to be shared. We all have a part to play in honoring the past." His voice wavered, but he stood firm, hoping to reach the individuals who seemed so deeply entrenched in their convictions. The room fell silent, and for a moment, it felt as if time had frozen. The tension was palpable, and Darren could see the uncertainty flickering in the eyes of the attendees. He understood that this moment could define the event, and he was determined to turn it into an opportunity for dialogue rather than division. He wanted to understand their perspective, to learn what had prompted their strong reaction, and to find common ground amid the storm that had suddenly erupted. As he awaited their response, the library, once a space of connection, seemed to hold its breath. The tension hung heavy in the air, a reminder that the stories they all sought to share were intertwined with deeper histories that could not be ignored. In this moment, Darren knew that the outcome of this confrontation could either fracture the gathering or solidify it as a community united by the shared power of storytelling. The silence that enveloped the library after Darren's appeal felt suffocating. The audience held their collective breath, anticipation hanging heavy in the air like a dense fog. The shadowy group, still standing defiantly at the back of the room, exchanged glances, their faces revealing a mixture of defiance and contemplation. It was a moment fraught with tension, and Darren's heart raced as he waited for their response, knowing that the direction of the event hung in the balance. After what felt like an eternity, one of the members stepped forward. An older woman with silver hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to reflect a wealth of experience spoke with a voice that resonated through the hall. "You speak of honoring stories, yet you do so without understanding the depths of what they entail," she said, her tone calm but firm. "These are not just tales of the past. They are echoes of pain, loss, and resilience that resonate with our very souls. It is not just about sharing. It is about the truth behind those stories." Darren nodded, feeling a rush of relief mixed with apprehension. "I understand that," he replied earnestly, trying to connect with her. "My goal was to bring those stories to light, to create a space where we can acknowledge and learn from the past." The woman's gaze softened slightly, but her resolve remained unyielding. She glanced back at her companions, who seemed to weigh her words carefully, considering the gravity of the moment. "Do you know what lies beneath these stories?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper as she leaned closer to Darren. "This library holds more than just the tales of those who lived before us. It is a vault of secrets that many wish to keep buried. If you're to share their narratives, you must first understand the darkness that surrounds them." The weight of her words hung in the air, stirring a sense of curiosity in Darren. "What do you mean by darkness?" he asked, intrigued yet apprehensive. "What secrets are you referring to?" The older woman hesitated for a moment, glancing at the others in her group, who now appeared more interested in the unfolding conversation. They seemed to share a bond that was forged through shared experiences, and Darren sensed that their stories held a significance far beyond mere narratives. "The library was built on the backs of those who suffered," she explained slowly, as if choosing her words carefully. "The foundations are riddled with stories of betrayal, loss, and untold sacrifices. Some of these tales have never seen the light of day, hidden away in the recesses of the library's depths. There are passages that reveal not just the past, but also the truths that many would rather forget." Darren's heart quickened as the implications of her words began to sink in. "Are you suggesting that there are more hidden stories? Stories that could change everything?" He pressed, his curiosity piqued. The woman nodded solemnly, her expression grave. "If you wish to honor those who came before us, you must be willing to confront these truths. They are not easy to hear, nor are they easy to share, but they are essential. With a newfound sense of determination, Darren asked, "How can I access these hidden passages? How do I find these stories?" The group exchanged knowing glances, as if weighing whether to reveal what they knew. Finally, the older woman spoke again, her voice tinged with a mix of reluctance and urgency. "You must venture deeper into the library. There are entrances concealed within the shelves, places that hold the weight of what you seek. But be warned, the knowledge you gain may come at a price." Darren's mind raced with possibilities. This was not merely an opportunity to unearth hidden tales, but also a chance to truly understand the library's legacy. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders, and he felt the urgency to delve into the depths of the library. "I'm ready," he said, conviction in his voice. "I want to learn and share these truths." As the gathering shifted, the group of shadowy figures seemed to soften, their expressions now reflecting a shared purpose rather than hostility. With a newfound sense of collaboration, they began to discuss their experiences, recounting the untold stories of those whose lives had been intertwined with the library. The tension that had once filled the room dissipated, replaced by a collective resolve to confront the past. This pivotal moment marked a turning point in the event. As stories flowed from the group, the gathering transformed into a powerful dialogue about truth, history, and the importance of understanding the stories that shaped their community. Darren listened intently, recognizing that he was not merely a facilitator, but also a participant in a journey that would lead him into the very heart of the library's secrets. As the day progressed, Darren felt a deepening connection with the participants and the hidden narratives that surrounded them. The library, once a mere backdrop for his dreams, now pulsed with life, revealing its layers and complexities. With each shared story, he felt more certain that the truths lurking within its walls were not just about the past. They were the keys to unlocking a future where understanding and empathy would thrive. The path ahead was fraught with challenges, but Darren was ready to embrace the journey, knowing that the revelations awaited him would be worth the price he might have to pay. In the days following the gathering, Darren found himself consumed by an insatiable curiosity and a burgeoning sense of responsibility. The stories he had heard reverberated in his mind, weaving a tapestry of grief, resilience, and hidden truths that begged to be uncovered. He was driven not just by the desire to honor those who had suffered, but by an innate need to understand the library's depths and the secrets it harbored. The library, once a sanctuary of knowledge, now loomed before him like a great beast waiting to be tamed. Darren spent countless hours poring over ancient texts and maps of the library, searching for any clues that might guide him to the concealed passages the older woman had mentioned. He became familiar with the intricate design of the building, tracing his fingers along the worn spines of books, feeling the whispers of the past echoing through the shelves. The more he learned, the more he understood the labyrinthine layout of the library and the history it encapsulated. Yet, he also sensed an underlying darkness that lurked just beneath the surface, beckoning him to explore further. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the library floor, Darren made his way to a section he had not previously explored. The dim light flickered ominously, illuminating the dust particles that danced in the air like tiny spirits. He felt a chill run down his spine as he approached a particularly old section of the library that had been cordoned off for years, the shelves towering like ancient sentinels guarding secrets long forgotten. With trembling hands, he pushed aside a heavy curtain that separated this area from the rest of the library. The air grew thick with the scent of aged paper and mildew, a stark reminder of the time that had passed since these stories were last touched. As he stepped into the shadows, a sense of foreboding enveloped him, igniting his instincts to retreat. Yet, he pressed on, determined to uncover the library's hidden passages and the tales they contained. As he explored the room, he noticed a peculiar book lying open on a small wooden table, its pages yellowed with age. The words seemed to leap out at him, each letter pulsating with a strange energy. It was a journal, chronicling the experiences of a past librarian who had dedicated her life to preserving the library's legacy. Her entry spoke of her struggles against forces that sought to erase the very existence of the story she cherished, hinting at the darker elements that had influenced the library's fate. The further Darren read, the more he realized that this librarian had encountered many of the same fears he felt. An overwhelming sense of responsibility to protect the stories while grappling with the malevolent forces that lurked within the library's walls. The entries described a hidden passage, a route that led to a chamber where the most profound secrets lay buried, guarded by ancient curses and the spirits of those who had been wronged. Compelled by the urgency of the librarian's words, Darren searched for any indication of the passage's location. He traced the contours of the wall, feeling for any irregularities that might hint at a hidden entrance. His heart raced as he pressed against the wooden paneling, and, to his astonishment, it shifted under his touch, revealing a narrow doorway that seemed to have been lost to time. As he stepped through the threshold, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The air was dense, heavy with a palpable energy that thrummed against his skin. A dim light flickered in the distance, drawing him deeper into the shadows. The passage wound downward, leading him into the bowels of a library, where he could sense the weight of countless stories pressing down on him, urging him to listen, to learn. The descent felt eternal, and with each step, he could hear faint echoes, whispers of those who had come before him. It was as though the library itself was alive, breathing through its walls, sharing the burdens of those who had sought refuge within its confines. The deeper he went, the more the whispers intensified, melding into a chorus that both exhilarated and terrified him. Suddenly, the passage opened into a vast underground chamber, its walls lined with bookshelves that seemed to stretch endlessly into darkness. In the center stood a pedestal, upon which rested a single, ancient tome, its cover adorned with intricate carvings that pulsed with a soft, eerie light. As Darren approached the pedestal, he felt an overwhelming compulsion to reach for the book, sensing that it contained the knowledge he sought. But as his fingers brushed against the cover, a chill raced down his spine. The whispers grew louder, their urgency palpable. They warned him of the dangers that lay ahead, of the price one must pay for knowledge. Yet, as he hesitated, he knew he could not turn back. The stories demanded to be heard, and the darkness that clung to the library was waiting for him to uncover its secrets. With determination, he opened the book, ready to confront whatever truths awaited him in the shadows. As Darren opened the ancient tome, a rush of energy surged through him, almost as if the book itself had awakened from a deep slumber. The pages, yellowed and fragile, were filled with elegant script and intricate illustrations that seemed to shift and shimmer as he turned them. Each word resonated with a weight that hinted at profound truths and forgotten histories, beckoning him to delve deeper into the narrative woven within. However, with each turn of the page, a sense of foreboding gripped him, reminding him that knowledge often comes with a price. The first few pages recounted the history of the library itself, detailing how it was built as a sanctuary for lost stories and forgotten souls. The text revealed the library's founders, dedicated scholars who sought to preserve the world's knowledge, no matter the cost. They established hidden passages and secret chambers within its walls to safeguard this knowledge from those who would misuse it. However, the journal entries also hinted at darker elements that haunted the library, forces that had manipulated its purpose over the years, turning it into a vessel of despair rather than enlightenment. Darren's heart raced as he absorbed the information. He realized that the whispers he had heard earlier were not merely figments of his imagination. They were the remnants of those who had once roamed these halls, seeking refuge from the outside world. As he continued to read, the tome unveiled a chilling truth. The library had become a battleground for conflicting forces, those who sought to protect its legacy and those who wished to exploit it. Suddenly, a passage caught his eye, detailing a hidden ritual performed by the founders to ward off the malevolent spirits that had begun to infiltrate the library. The ritual involved a specific incantation and the use of artifacts believed to hold immense power. According to the text, if performed incorrectly, the ritual could unleash chaos, allowing the very spirits the founders sought to contain to rise again. The weight of this knowledge bore down on Darren, for he now understood the gravity of his exploration. Just as he began to process the implications of the text, a cold gust of wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing the dim light that had guided him. Panic surged within him as darkness enveloped him, leaving him vulnerable and disoriented. The whispers intensified, a cacophony of voices warning him, pleading with him to escape before it was too late. But Darren, driven by a fierce determination, fumbled in the darkness for the book, knowing it was his only means of survival. As he grasped the tome, the whispers morphed into a single voice, one that felt eerily familiar. It was the voice of the librarian he had read about, calling out to him from the depths of despair. "You must understand," she urged, her tone urgent and pleading. "The knowledge you seek is both a gift and a curse. You must tread carefully, for the line between salvation and damnation is perilously thin." Feeling the weight of her words, Darren sought the flickering remnants of light that had vanished moments earlier. He strained to listen to the whispers, piecing together fragments of their warnings. As the darkness pressed in around him, he remembered the artifacts mentioned in the tome, the key to protecting the library and its stories from the malevolent forces that threatened to engulf it. Resolutely, he set off in search of the artifacts. His hands brushed against the cool stone walls, guided by the remnants of the whispers that now urged him forward. As he moved deeper into the chamber, he stumbled upon an alcove filled with dust-covered relics, each radiating a strange energy. Among them, he spotted an intricately carved box, its surface adorned with ancient symbols that seemed to pulse with life. With trepidation, he approached the box, feeling a magnetic pull that urged him to open it. As he lifted the lid, a warm glow emanated from within, illuminating the darkness around him. Inside lay a collection of objects, a small crystal vial, a tarnished locket, and an ornate dagger. The book had mentioned these artifacts as the key to the ritual, the very items that would allow him to confront the spirits and protect the library from their wrath. As he gathered the artifacts, Darren felt a surge of power course through him, intertwining with the knowledge he had uncovered. With each object, he could feel the history of the library, the stories of those who had come before him, flowing into him. He knew he was no longer just a curious visitor. He had become a custodian of the library's legacy, and it was his responsibility to safeguard it. With renewed determination, he prepared to return to the center of the chamber, where the tome lay open on the pedestal. The whispers guided him, their urgency building as he retraced his steps. As he reached the pedestal, he felt a sudden tremor shake the ground beneath him. The library was awakening, the forces within it responding to his presence. The spirits were restless, and he knew he had to act quickly to perform the ritual and seal the darkness away once and for all. Darren took a deep breath, steadying himself against the rising tide of chaos. He understood that the moment had come. The fate of the library and the stories contained within it rested upon his shoulders. With the artifacts in hand and the tome open before him, he prepared to confront the shadows that had lingered for far too long, ready to unravel the truths that had bound him to this cursed place. The air in the library crackled with tension as Darren gathered his resolve. The artifacts rested heavily in his hands, each imbued with the energy of the spirits that lingered within the shadows of the library. He could feel their presence all around him, a swirling mass of emotions, fear, anger, despair, and longing, each vying for his attention. This was it, the moment he had been preparing for since he first stepped into the ancient building. He had to confront the very essence of the darkness that had plagued the library for generations. As he placed the tome on the pedestal, he recalled the words of the librarian from the whispers. The line between salvation and damnation is perilously thin. The gravity of those words settled over him like a shroud, reminding him of the stakes involved in this confrontation. He could not falter now. The souls of the countless individuals who had sought refuge within these walls depended on him. He knew that the ritual was a delicate balance, and any misstep could release the chaos that had been contained for so long. He opened the tome to the designated passage, the ink still fresh in his mind. The words seemed to dance on the page, pulsing with an urgency that resonated deep within him. He began to recite the incantation, each syllable reverberating through the chamber. As he spoke, he felt the artifacts respond, the locket growing warm against his palm, the dagger vibrating with energy. The air around him thickened, charged with an intensity that sent shivers down his spine. Suddenly, a powerful gust of wind whipped through the library, extinguishing the remaining light and plunging him into darkness. The whispers transformed into a deafening roar, a cacophony of voices that echoed through the chamber. Fear threatened to overwhelm him, but he pressed on, his voice steadying as he continued the incantation. He could feel the energy shifting, a palpable force pushing back against the darkness that threatened to engulf him. As he reached the climax of the ritual, a blinding light erupted from the tome, illuminating the entire chamber. In that moment, Darren saw the spirits, ethereal figures trapped in a web of shadows, their faces twisted with anguish. They reached out to him, their eyes filled with desperation. "Help us!" they cried in unison, their voices intertwining, forming a haunting melody that resonated within him. Darren's heart raced as he realized the weight of his actions. He was not merely confronting darkness. He was standing at the threshold of liberation for these tormented souls. With renewed determination, he lifted the locket and the dagger, channeling his will into the artifacts. He envisioned the spirits' freedom, a world where their stories could finally be told, free from the chains of despair. "Release them," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The light intensified, enveloping him and the chamber in a warm embrace. The whispers morphed into a singular, harmonious chant, echoing Darren's words. He could feel the energy of the library shifting, the oppressive weight of the darkness beginning to recede as the spirits responded to his call. In that moment of unity, Darren became a conduit for the spirits' collective yearning. He could feel their strength melding with his own, forming a protective barrier around him. The darkness writhed and thrashed, fighting against the growing light, but Darren stood firm, his voice unwavering as he completed the final lines of the incantation. The library trembled, ancient stones vibrating with the power of the ritual. Then, in a blinding flash, the darkness was shattered. A wave of energy surged forth, sweeping through the library and dispelling the shadows that had long haunted its halls. The spirits, now free from their torment, floated upward, their expressions transformed from anguish to peace. As they ascended into the light, Darren felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over him, knowing he had fulfilled the purpose that had brought him to this moment. As the light faded, the library was forever changed. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a serene stillness that felt almost sacred. The tome lay closed on the pedestal, its pages now shimmering with a soft glow, reflecting the stories it had once protected. Darren took a moment to gather his thoughts, overwhelmed by the gravity of what had just transpired. He had confronted the darkness not only for the library, but for the countless souls who had sought refuge within its walls. Emerging from the library, Darren felt a profound sense of accomplishment. He had not only unraveled the mysteries of the past, but had also forged a new beginning for the space that had once been steeped in sorrow. The air felt different now, alive with the stories that could finally be told without fear of being consumed by darkness. He understood that the library was not merely a building filled with books. It was a living entity, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. With each step away from the library, Darren knew he had become part of its legacy. The whispers that had once terrified him now felt like a gentle breeze, a reminder of the countless stories that would continue to thrive in the light. He had taken the journey into the heart of darkness and emerged victorious, a guardian of tales that would echo through time, ensuring that the library would forever remain a sanctuary of hope and knowledge.